Welcome to the Demand Stacking Podcast, where early stage business to business startups can learn how to grow a predictable demand generation strategy to help them hit their aggressive growth targets. Now, here's your hosts, Scott Gilbert and Brian Koffler.
All right. Welcome back to the Demand Stacking Podcast. On today's episode, we have Bobby Loftus joining us, who is the sales development manager at Gainsight. And what we're going to be talking about with him is just talking about how sales development teams can create more alignment with their marketing teams, with their demand gen teams, to ultimately create more pipeline from marketing channels. So Bobby, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So I guess to start, I just gave you obviously a very brief introduction. Could you just let everyone know who you are, what you do, and just a little background on yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm one of our managers at Gainsight of sales development. I work across our commercial and enterprise teams on the new business space. Actually, also recently started our new customer sales development team as well. Prior to that, a lot of people in the SDR space, always say that SDR is the toughest role, and I appreciate that. But I actually started my career working in a much more difficult role, I thought, which was campaigns for about 8 months, which is about all the rejection of SDR land, the feelings of starting a new company, that sort of thing, of starting a process from scratch, but half the pay and twice the hours. So after some time doing that, I got into sales development and SaaS. I worked at a company called Bizzabo, an event software company, where I met someone who brought me along to found the first SDR team at Insighted, a community platform where I met Brian here for the first time and worked alongside him. Then Insighted was acquired by Gainsight in 2022, and I've been there ever since.
Awesome. I think I saw on your LinkedIn that you worked at ZocDoc. Was that it?
Yes, ZocDoc was my first foray into sales and SaaS.
Were you a full rep cycle there?
I was an SDR for most of my time there, and then I moved to actually an account management type role when we were changing our pricing model from a yearly fee to yearly subscription fee to more of a value-based fee based on how much people were using the product.
Yeah, I don't know what size companies you were reaching out to, but I think that role is very similar to a role I did at a company called Yodel, which was like hundreds of cold calls every day to SMB people, like really aggressive. It was tough, but a good learning lesson. So I hear you.
Yeah, that high velocity sales motion, definitely. It's a good place to cut your teeth. But yeah, you get tired of doing 100 calls a day after some point, definitely.
Yeah, and having to like argue with people. Yeah, I totally get it. Cool. So obviously what we want to talk to you about today is just like how you're working with marketing teams, demand gen teams, how you align with them, all that good stuff. So I guess to start, you've worked at a couple organizations. I'm curious, like, of the organizations you worked at, what are some of the characteristics of the marketing and demand generation teams that you've worked with and that you've really like enjoyed in terms of alignment and I don't know, just like marching to the same drum?
Yeah, you mentioned marching to the same drum. I think that is kind of the key of what I see successful marketing and SDR alignment look like. I think a lot of organizations kind of see marketing stopping at a certain point, like maybe just generating leads that the SDR team then works and then give that to the sales team. And it's very segmented that way. And I think the best SDR marketing teams work with the same North Star, which is pipeline. Well, it should be revenue, of course, as first and foremost, but from there, like both have pipeline as their what they're looking into and use that as the prism to view leads and AQLs and MQLs, whatever you call them in your own funnel. But both have that as the end destination in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you're right. It should be revenue, but I think, especially with some of these, like, I don't know what the sales cycle is at Gainsight, but when there's long sales cycles or even 90 days, it's hard to measure against that when you're kind of looking towards meetings. So I think pipeline's a great leading indicator for that, right? You're getting more qualified meetings with your sales team.
I think revenue is good from a strategic way of looking back at, hey, like fine tuning your ICP, that sort of thing. But yeah, in terms of the day-to-day strategies, using pipeline as the alignment between the teams.
Bobby, like, flip side of that question, what has been a challenging or maybe not a great experience, or what makes it not a great experience from like a SDR or SDR manager point of view when working with a marketing team?
Yeah, it's similar to the inverse of what I said there. Well, I think a lot of people don't understand SDR teams like don't have unlimited bandwidth. It's not unlike, what we see in our space in the customer success space. Like CSMs are just kind of given everything that support can't handle or sales can't handle. And I think SDR, a lot of times, if it's, oh, sales can't work this right now, it's not ready, give it to SDR to talk to. Marketing sourced X amount of leads, talk to people, scan them at a booth, like give them to SDR to follow up on. And I think it's really important from a strategic level to understand like SDRs only have so much time, and the answer always isn't giving more. It's really important to look backwards and see what SDRs are converting and make sure that they're spending more of their time on the leads that are going to convert at that time. So that's kind of from a leader, a strategic level. And I'd also add on to that from a tactical point with if you're a campaign manager per se, or a smaller company that is operating in that role sometimes. It's very important to make sure you are like telling SDRs, you're giving them a why, giving them context for the campaigns that you want them to follow up on. Just like when I have my SDRs send out emails to prospects, I can't have them just send case studies and say, hey, I thought you might find this valuable. No one's going to read that. They're not going to do the work to do that. And it's kind of similar with marketing, giving leads to follow up on the SDR. It's important to give them from a tactical perspective the context of what you're trying to do with those leads and why they might be interested in following up on.
I actually have a follow-up question to that, because something that we struggle with as demand gen marketers is how much context or how much detail to give an SDR or sales team. Like, do they care what ad was clicked on, or is it just like the bullet points that are needed? So like from your perspective, what's the right amount of info, and like how is it delivered? Is it like a formal meeting? Is it a Slack? Is it an email? Because that's like really challenging from the marketing side of things.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. I think it is important to have it in a written place somewhere. Different companies operate differently on email or Slack, and it is always important to have that as a backstop. But things can also get lost in the shuffle. So I think you need to prioritize like what are the most important campaigns you run or ads you run, or what you want the SDRs to work most. And then you can have enablement sessions around that. But for anything that you're providing, written communication around, it's important, in my opinion, to have a sentence showcasing why people may have been interested in clicking in that ad or joining that webinar. So the SDRs have a why when they reach out.
And then just a final follow-up to that. Do you prefer that info is delivered to like you or the management team to then deliver to the SDR team, or everyone at once, or some combo? I know,
I'd say combo.
Especially larger companies, like that can get challenging when there's a lot of reps.
Yeah, whatever size company that has an SDR team, it's important for the manager, the leader of that team, to meet regularly with marketing, with whomever is crafting campaigns, to understand from that perspective, so they can kind of champion that message to their team as well. But it's also good for that person, that marketing side, to directly deliver it as well.
Yeah, I think you brought up some good points. I love the point around like, you only have so much time in the day. I think that's something a lot of marketers miss. And I think we talked about that on one of our last episodes. I actually did that as a demand gen manager. I sent like hundreds of content downloads to like my SDR team. And I'm like, hey, you got to follow up on this. This is a long time ago, but we actually like that hurt us like so much, because I not only gave them leads that they spent a lot of time on, and a lot of them didn't convert to demo, but I took them away from their outbound prospecting that they were doing to like target accounts. So I think it's such a good message, and it's good to hear it from a sales development leader that like you have to be mindful of their day to day and what they're doing, and like and not just saying, hey, I did this, so you have to go follow up.
Yeah, I agree. And I just like to add, I think it's also incumbent on the sales development leader to do that as well, to protect their team's time, because that's not everyone, in marketing has been in the role. They may not understand that point. So it's not just marketer's job. It's also the sales development leader's job to protect that time.
Yeah. And I also like your point on just like a quick value prop of like, hey, here's what, they downloaded, or why they downloaded, or what's important. Typically, like if it's a webinar, for example, typically that webinar aligns with some value prop around the platform that the team should already know. So I don't think they have to know everything that happened in the webinar or like watch the whole thing. But if, like in your example, and I'm making this up, if it's like a Gainsight webinar and it's about increasing customer retention, that's probably all that, like, they probably need to know, like, hey, this was specifically about improving customer retention through QBRs. I'm making it up. And they probably get the gist then of like, okay, I know what the intention was. I know our product, so I know how to frame it. They don't really need to know everything. And I think that comes back to your point about how much, where they're focusing their time. Cause like, if you're like, hey, you got to go watch this webinar, you got to go read this guide, or you got to like, they don't have time for that. Like they really don't. And it's probably not the best use of time. So I think it's a good point of like, they don't need to know everything, but giving them enough to like help them understand and frame the conversation, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, just a couple of minutes of adding some context on from the marketer side can increase the amount of SDRs that actually follow through with follow-ups on the webinars or whatever campaign you run by a huge margin.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to just talk about some of the prospecting strategies that your team is currently doing. I'm just curious if you can give any quick ones to the audience of like what's been working well, what hasn't, anything that specifically seems to resonate more in terms of getting meetings. Would love to just hear if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, you say some of these things out loud and they sound so obvious, but people don't always actually do them. And one of those tropes that I find is just reaching out to the right people at the right time. Like making sure that who you're spending time with is someone that is, in your ICP that's potentially interested at this time. It takes just as much effort to reach out to someone that's not going to be interested as someone that is. And how do you find those people that are potentially interested? I think a great source of leads that people should always be following up on is people that have expressed interest in the past. Like we've been finding a ton of success reaching out to people that have had opportunities with us a year ago, 2 years ago, and also keeping track of them as they move companies. We like to keep track of them on LinkedIn Sales Nav, save people to lists, and then we get actually notified by LinkedIn when they switch companies. So I'd say that's key. And also, I mean, as simple as it is, and maybe the most SDR manager answer is just picking up the phone is something that people should be doing more right now. Like as we have the advent of AI spreading across our industry, like email is going to get tougher, written communication is going to get more difficult. And the phone is something that, like it's going to take longer for that to catch up on.
Those are great points. I like the close loss. That's like super simple thing to set up, right? That probably gets you some engagement. And the phone part is interesting too. I agree with you. Like the people who prospect us, like I think almost none of them are calling us, right? They're just emailing us. They're sending messages on LinkedIn. I think it's an easy differentiator, right? Just to like pick up the phone and show that you're a human and you have a voice and you can potentially help someone. To your point, it sounds simple, but it's something that I don't think a lot of people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that's when I've taken meetings in the past year, it's been almost entirely through the phone that I've been, and I also think different people all have different channels that they prefer to be reached on. So if you're over investing in one channel like email or like LinkedIn, you're going to be missing a separate pool of people that are more similar to me that actually prefer to be reached out to on the phone. And I think the phone is the one in the current world that gets missed a lot just because it's the most difficult. It's the one you're most likely to face rejection as an SDR.
Does your team book mostly through the phone, or is it a mix of everything?
No, we book actually primarily, I would say, through LinkedIn and email. I would say we probably book about 20% of our meetings through the phone. But I mean, I think it's something that I see certain individuals kind of follow through their strength. I bring up the phone largely just because I think that's the thing that's most likely to be neglected now. And I think everyone needs to be a certain level of proficiency with all three channels, as well as be inventive to look in other places like Slack groups in the industry, that sort of thing. But it's really important to empower SDRs to like follow through with what their best way to book meetings is. Like there's not just one way to skin the cat. People should follow through with what they're best at and book meetings that way.
This kind of parlays into a rhetoric that is all over LinkedIn these days. I'm sure you've seen this, Bobby, about the SDR role being dead or evolving or being not needed or super needed in the future. There's like a lot of strong opinions on the SDR role as we move forward, especially in the world of AI, like you mentioned, and everything via automation. Like, what's your take on that? What's your take on the SDR role now and in the future and how it's evolving?
Yeah, it's a great question. People definitely talk about it. I try to stay off LinkedIn as much as I can. I'm kind of on an anti-social media kick in general, and I think LinkedIn's part of that. I have to be on it for work a lot. I don't think the SDR role itself is dead or dying. I think what's more likely to be dead or dying is probably the VP of sales development role, except maybe at a few of the examples that Scott, you were bringing up earlier that we had both worked at, where you're doing high velocity sales, 100 calls a day. Really, I mean, there's just going to be, the fact of the matter is there's going to be less SDRs in the future, but I think the role is still going to be key and important. And we just need to refocus it onto what's going to be most effective to bring in meetings.
I agree. And I actually think that like the SDRs will and should probably be compensated more and be more experienced than like when we all started in the industry, most of the SDRs were right out of college, not paid super well. A lot of them probably didn't end up being SDRs, but I actually feel like there might be a world where there's SDRs a little bit more of a long-term career path and the compensation's higher, and there's true professionals who do this for a living for their most of their career and are really good at what they do. And the value that they bring to companies is tremendous, more than a lot of roles, honestly. So like I think your answer, I think I agree for like with what you're saying. Now, how that's structured and what that role looks like may be a little different, but like it's just interesting how the roles changed even in 5 or 10 years looking back and how it will change moving forward. Are you seeing different attributes or different types of people when you're looking to hire or backfill roles for Gainsight from an SDR perspective?
Yeah, when we look to hire, I like to say we try to look at it from a team perspective. Like I mentioned, different people have different strengths, different channels. So we want to get people that are willing to try things on their own, to start new ways of prospecting. And so I think we are like more willing, we're still open to people out of college that are ready to hustle and learn. And that's like people you want on your team if they are high aptitude, seeming a lot of growth potential. But we also do like to get people from different backgrounds that have tried different ways of outreach, maybe have done some sort of entrepreneurial thing in their past and are willing to do things like, we've seen some SDRs have success, like diving into Slack groups and ingratiating themselves in their industry and then posting on LinkedIn more and connecting with people in that industry and creating some pull towards them that way. We've also seen other SDRs just have success really diving into signals, which can be something like a tool like a Sixth Sense, or it can be just following up on LinkedIn, seeing who is moving company to company that has expressed interest in the past. So I would say we're definitely seeing a move towards more self-starters, which is something I think SDRs and people hiring in general always say they've been looking to hire, but it's a lot more important now that the role is changing and it requires more mental aptitude and trying new things.
Yeah. I think just to circle back on your point, yeah, I don't think the role is definitely not dying in my opinion, but it is evolving. I think to your point, back in the day, you could make like 100 cold calls, you could like blast hundreds of people and like get some success, and kind of like everything, right? It becomes more mainstream, more people are doing it, and then there's a lot more noise in the space. So yeah, I think the notion of it dying, I think also some of it might be the industry some people are in, like some industries that are a little more saturated, it might be a lot harder to,
Sure.
get through outbound. So I think some of that like bold language you hear on LinkedIn is maybe from unique experiences, but I think for the majority of people, it's like still a great way to get consistent meetings. To your point, might need to be like a little more strategic, but definitely not dead. I mean, we see it in our business. Like we book meetings through outbound and get customers. And I think the notion of saying it's dead is like it's a pretty bold claim.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that talk is, as we're saying, like in reaction to bad SDR work. The SDR role was created as we're saying in the past when there was kind of just these principles of we don't know what works, and SDRs like have all the time in the world, and so it's basically just, hey, you kid out of college, go figure out how to book meetings. We'll give you this script we wrote in 20 minutes before. Go do something. And now we've evolved to actually being able to see what works, see what leads we're converting, be able to find people that are more likely to open up a project right now and focus SDR there.
I also see a lot of like people being like, oh, like a person right out of college can't call a C-level person and like convince them. And like, I actually don't think that's true either. Cause in my opinion, you can tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think cold calls are relatively high level. You're trying to get a sense of if there's like a problem and a need and a sense to take the next step of scheduling a call or a demo. And I think if those people are well trained, they know how to guide those talk tracks, they know how to like see if there is that need. I don't think they need to be some like really experienced person, and like they should understand the prospect, but I don't think they need to be this like expert that's on their level. I think that's more of a level of just like training, and when they call, are they approaching it correctly? Are they like communicating well on the call and sounding clear? I think it's more a symptom of that than it is like, well, this junior person is not capable of getting this higher level person to a meeting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's definitely some training that needs to be involved, as you're saying. And early on, there should be a script for the SDR that can get them part of the way there. That should be fine-tuned not only by the SDR leadership, but like marketing and sales should have input on how we're positioning the product related to how our customers talk about it. But yeah, there also needs to be continual training of the SDRs, not just in like, hey, let's practice our cold calls, but also this is what our prospects are going through. This is how our value prop ties to their bottom line, and help build that so they are able to talk from a more macro business level when they are reaching out to the C-suite.
Yeah, on the theme of like team building, Bobby, and SDR teams, what's your opinion on work from home versus in an office, specifically for SDR roles? Because I know just like contextually and historically, the SDR role was a role that you were in the office sitting in like a bullpen usually with the other SDRs and the other managers around to help with coaching. I think all three of us have went through this pre-COVID pandemic times. And now it's like obviously a different world, and I imagine it's harder. So, like, what's your opinion? And is it more challenging for like a leadership role with a remote workforce?
It's absolutely harder. I mean, you can't have the same level of knowledge sharing and team bonding that you do in a workplace where everyone's in the same spot learning from each other. The flip side is, of course, you have better access to talent in different places. You can find people that you wouldn't be able to find before. And also, of course, your company can save a lot of money in terms of paying for rent. But it's definitely a challenge. I think it's incumbent on SDR leaders to make sure they have recurring team meetings. I think it's a good idea. I've seen before meeting every day for 15 minutes as a quick stand up, just so everyone can surface problems, but also so people kind of bond that way and understand what's going through. But it's really key to have a recurring meeting, whether that's 30 to 60 minutes. I like actually doing 60 minutes where you sit down and talk both tactics and strategy and actually share what other SDRs are doing, what's working for them. Because in the remote world, a big problem is SDRs can be stuck in silos and not really hear each other, make calls, or see what their emails are that they're writing that are working. And it's really important to make sure you can facilitate that knowledge sharing remotely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, it's such an emotional job, or can be such an emotional highs and lows that feel like if you're siloed for any role, but especially SDR role, it can be really tough mentally. If you have a few bad calls, no one's there to pick you up or tell you this is what you should do next time, or a manager coming over to you. I know this happened to me. I would get like super frustrated back in the day. So yeah, I think like some structure is very much needed, especially if it's younger employees who maybe this is their first or second job. So I like your thinking about the kind of teamwork in a remote world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's some degree of that we can't fix, right? I'm thinking about the immediate rejection that an SDR might face, but it's important for managers to make sure they reframe any call, like any rejection, as kind of a learning experience. Like I used to like after every conversation I had to go back to my script and kind of listen to the call and see where I might have said something differently, and just kind of have it be a falling forward movement where each failed call, each rejection could be bringing you closer to a better talking track, better relating to your prospects.
Cool. Last question for you, Bobby. Let's say you're talking to a new marketing leader who's about to work with an SDR team. What are some key strategies you would recommend to them to help them align better with their SDR team?
I think it's really important. This is a strategy I've been working on at Gainsight recently that I've actually been inspired by listening to like Chris Walker, Refine Labs. But it's really important to find what leads you guys have been historically given to SDRs and compare and contrast that to how much you're actually converting to sales opportunities. And with that, you can understand where you need to improve, maybe where you should stop giving SDRs AQLs and refocus them in other areas. So I think that's really important, is just understanding what the conversion rates are from different channels. I also think a big key is with marketing and SDR, make sure you have a clear SLA between the two teams, because things can get gray, things can get dirty with different attribution. And we're just not in a world anymore where like everything is always one team brought this in. I think it's really important for there to be some degree of multi-touch attribution where SDRs can be comped or not separately from how marketing says this is where this comes in. And this is something I've learned, in the past working alongside Brian as well. But any time that you spend squabbling over how you split the pie is time that you're not spending on building and making the pie bigger. So that's something that's key. Make sure you spend as little time arguing about attribution as possible and focus on just driving more pipeline.
Cool. Well, that's all we had for you, Bobby. This was a super insightful conversation. So thank you for coming on. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm glad you guys were both nice and chipper even after your Knicks loss last night.
Yeah, it was hard. It was difficult, but we pulled through.
Yeah, you guys will still probably win the series. We'll see.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Demand Stacking Podcast. And with the simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. But if you want more, go to our website, srgmarketing.co, or follow us on LinkedIn by searching SRG Marketing. Remember, to grow your sales pipeline, you need a strategy, and that requires a plan.